I've got 6:30, so you can go ahead and get started. Do you have everything you need, Chair Adams? You've got the script and everything. Todd, can you hear me? Looks like Todd isn't
Apparently
hearing our
not.
audio. Todd, can you hear us?
I just realized my volume was turned
Oh,
down. And
okay.
I'm like,
I was
I am
like,
not hearing Anna at
you
all. I'm on
you
at
can
all. What's
go
going
you
on
can
here?
go ahead and get started. It's after 6:30.
All
Do you
right.
have everything you need?
I do.
Okay,
I do.
great.
Good evening. Now is the time and place for a meeting of the Beaverton Planning Commission. For the record, I will do a roll call to verify which commissioner members are participating this evening. Commissioner McCann,
Here.
Commissioner Holmes,
Present.
Commissioner Mettler,
Here.
Commissioner McAvoy,
Here.
and Commissioner Winter.
Here.
Excellent. For the record, let it show that Commissioner Speck is absent and excused. We are now at Commission Communications. Commission, any communications? Looks like no communications. Staff, any communications?
Good evening, Chair Adams, Anna Slatinsky, Planning Division Manager in the Community Development Department. I do not have any staff comments tonight.
All right. Thank you, Anna. We are now at the new business. The first agenda item is a work session on the code maintenance project. The order of the work session tonight will be as follows. We will begin with the city staff presentation, followed by discussion and questions of staff by the commission. The Planning Commission will then hear public comments regarding the work session item. Individual comments will be limited to 5 minutes and must be directed toward the work session item. The commission will ask additional questions of individuals, provided comments, or staff. We will now begin with the staff presentation presented by Senior Planner Steve Regner.
Good evening, Commission. Thank you. My name is Steve Regner, Senior Planner with the City of Beaverton, and we are here tonight for a work session on the 2025 Code Maintenance Project Text Amendment. We will be providing an overview of the project and seeking feedback from Planning Commission on how they want to engage with the project as we get towards the formal hearing process. But before I dive into the details, I'd invite Division Planning Manager Anna Slatinsky to say a few words about the project.
Thank you. I just wanted to set a little bit of context before Mr. Regner proceeds with his presentation. Planning Commission has recently had work sessions on a couple of other city projects, and I think it's helpful to kind of do a little compare contrast with this particular project, the code maintenance project. All three of the projects will ultimately result in proposals to amend the development code. And those other projects, including last session's work session for the Designing Walkable Places project, and previous work sessions on the Transportation System Plan, will also result in proposed amendments to the development code. But each project has somewhat of a different kind of scale and scope. The Designing Walkable Places project, as you know, is really focused on um, making updates to the code that foster the creation of dense, vibrant neighborhoods in Beaverton that remove impediments to denser mixed-use zoning, partly in response to state law, but partly also in order to make some kind of long recognized updates to the code. Um, the The transportation system plan update, in contrast, is a very large multi-year policy project with a lot of technical work, a lot of engagement with the community, and it will have a lot of iteration with Planning Commission and with City Council, as well as with community stakeholders in order to go through the process of updating that important policy document. For commissioners who have not yet had the opportunity to participate in a work session about the transportation system plan, you will have lots of opportunities to talk about this policy project. The reason I wanted to bring it up in the context of this work session tonight is that although these are all going to be proposed text amendments to the development code, they are really very different projects. Code maintenance project, as Steve will describe, and as your memo uh, that you received prior to this meeting describe, it is a annual project that is routine in the sense that we recognize that there are a variety of um, more miscellaneous updates and refinements to the development code that we need to be making on a regular basis. And as such, it is not intended to implement any kind of new policy. It's really more of a fix it. And Steve will go into more detail about this, but um, I wanted to draw a contrast, especially for the newer planning commissioners, because it's important, I think, to recognize that the engagement of planning commission and the kind of the magnitude of the decisions that commission will be making are not the same with every text amendment proposal, even though procedurally the review of Planning Commission will be the same. For every text amendment proposal, Planning Commission will hold a public hearing, will receive testimony, and will make a recommendation to City Council, who are the decision makers for text amendments, which are a legislative land use action. But the subject matter and the type of decision that's being made will vary depending on the project. So I just wanted to give that little overview. It will make a little bit more sense once Steve walks through some of the details of the code maintenance project. But as always, every planning commission is an opportunity to kind of explore a little bit this broader context of what the planning commission's role is and the different types of agenda items that you will be reviewing over time. So with that, I will hand it over to Mr. Regner. Take it away.
Thank you, Anna. All right, let's look at an agenda for tonight. So we are going to cover in our presentation what these changes to the development code are going to look like. We're going to get in a little bit more detail about the purpose of code maintenance, elaborating a little bit more on what Ms. Litinsky just shared, an overview of the procedural requirements and Planning Commission's role, a quick overview of our anticipated project schedule, and then some examples of the types of amendments that Planning Commission can expect to see when the formal amendments are provided prior to the Planning Commission hearing. Following staff's presentation, we'll open it up for discussion with a couple of questions for the Planning Commission from staff. These will be the same questions that were at the bottom of the staff memo, but also it's an opportunity for the commission to ask any questions of staff. So a little bit more about the purpose of code maintenance. As Ms. Litinsky mentioned, this is a little bit of a different type of land use application that Planning Commission will be reviewing. You have your development review where there's actually changes to land occurring, and then we have your legislative amendments where we're making big policy changes, whether it's Cooper Mountain or designing walkable places. This is really more about good housekeeping and cleanup. We're looking to improve the efficiency of the code. If there are issues where there is conflict in the code or vague language in the code where we're not being as effective in implementing existing goals and policies, that's what this project is really trying to tackle. Those example projects I and Ms. Litinsky mentioned, those larger packages of land use changes intend to establish new goals and policies. And this project is kind of the opposite. We have existing goals and policies already established, and we are working to make sure that the development code is doing a good or hopefully better job of helping us reach those goals. There's also an opportunity to include updates related to changes in state law and overall provide better customer service, both for our internal customers, our reviewers, other planning staff, but of course, most importantly, our external customers, our applicants, property owners, business owners, who can look into the code and understand this is actually what the code is asking for and help applicants and staff have really productive conversations. Starting last year, we initiated an effort to start doing this on a more regular basis. For those that have been around for a while, you might recognize the term omnibus. That is what we used to call this effort. And prior to 2024, the last time we had done it was 2019. It had been done at an intermittent, irregular timeline. And you can imagine from 2019 to 2024, there was quite a considerable backlog of items we had identified to update the code, but hadn't been able to do yet. So our goal moving forward is to actually do this at minimum on a once a year basis. So last year, the planning team and the project manager set up some good procedures about being able to do this on an annual basis. Planning Commission approved this project near the end of 2024. And here we are in 2025, taking kind of round two of this code maintenance, and we'll do hopefully the same thing in 2026, if not sooner. As we mentioned a little bit, this is a legislative process, otherwise known as a Type 4. This is where we're actually changing the rules of the code and not actually dealing with, improvement of land or land development. This will anticipate to have a really broad spectrum of items we're going to be addressing across all chapters of the development code and all kind of topics and focus and areas. And because of that, we anticipate each and every property within the city of Beaverton to potentially be impacted in one way or another. The scale might be very small, but we expect a lot of these rules to apply to just about all the properties in the city. As such, there will be a citywide notice sent out. So every property owner in the city will be receiving a notice. Within that notice, we'll have information about what the project is, when the public hearings are, how to review the materials, how to engage in the process, ask questions, provide public comment. But we will also be including something called a Measure 56 notice. This is a notice that is a state mandated set of language whenever there's going to be legislative requirements that could have the potential to impact property values. It doesn't require us to say how much it's going to affect property values, and especially with a project like this where we're doing, honestly, hundreds of little changes, it's really, really hard to quantify. So everyone that's a property owner in the city of Beaverton will get a letter that says, here's what the project is, here's how to get involved, and it may affect your property value. And we do that to remain in compliance with state law. Along with all of the proposed code amendments, there will be a staff report with legal findings demonstrating compliance with all the applicable approval criteria, including demonstrating compliance with other applicable regulatory documents. Those could be documents at the local level, like Beaverton's comprehensive plan, or other city ordinances requirements. It could be a regional plan, like the Metro Urban Growth Management Functional Plan, or it could be statewide regulations like the statewide planning goals. So responses to all of those different regulatory elements and how what we're doing complies with that will be part of the legal findings in that staff report. As with any Type 4 or legislative process, City Council will be the final decision maker here. Unlike a development proposal, if you're building an apartment complex or something, Planning Commission is the final decision maker. But here, Planning Commission plays a different role. Planning Commission will be more of a preliminary review body. So you will be getting the proposed amendments first. You'll be getting the staff report and all those findings first. And really, one of the roles of Planning Commission is to be able to provide that feedback and guidance both to staff and to City Council. While City Council has a really broad spectrum of things they wrangle with, Planning Commission really has a pretty strong focus on land use. And therefore, you have some experience with reviewing development code, reviewing projects, see what works, see what maybe isn't working, and working with staff on those topics. So you'll be able to be the first ones to review the proposed code changes and let staff know, yes, we like it. No, we think it should change, and here's why. And at the end of the public hearing, ideally, Planning Commission would then vote to recommend approval to City Council to then consider the proposed changes, either recommend the proposed changes as brought forth by staff or as amended as City Council votes on. So if there are items that Planning Commission determines should be modified in some way, Planning Commission could vote to make amendments, and then those amendments get carried forward with the rest of staff's proposal to City Council. As this is an annual process, it's no surprise that we began in January. Toward the 2024 code maintenance process wrapped up in fall 2024. So we did a project manager handoff. The goal is every year a different planner carries this project forward. It's good experience for the planners, but also it gets a different perspective on this process and different areas of expertise. So we like to make sure we have that. We did the project handoff, and it's carried forward kind of the remaining backlog that we didn't get to last year. And then we add to that list as we go. As we administer code, we identify issues and we put it on a list. So we have a ever running total of things we'd love to fix. But then we start identifying priorities. What's giving us the biggest headaches? Which ones, for legal reasons, we need to address sooner than later? And then we start identifying and listing out those priorities. And then we share that kind of internal list and priority list in our schedules with our internal staff to know, hey, this is what we're going to be working on. Here's when we're going to be addressing those issues. Right now, we're in phase 2, which is the draft code amendments and outreach phase. So right now, we're doing a lot of collaboration with city staff, especially right now, other divisions, if we're going to be doing work that might affect other folks. So if we're doing things involving utilities and grading and stormwater, maybe we talk to site development. If we're doing things about vehicle circulation, we'll talk to our transportation folks to make sure that whatever we're doing aligns with their regulatory documents as well as best practices. And we are now starting to prepare draft amendments to the code and doing some amount of outreach, including this Planning Commission work session tonight. I will say a note on outreach, as has kind of already been talked about before. This is in scope and scale much more limited compared to some of our other projects like designing walkable places and Cooper Mountain and transportation system plan, where those projects are really creating and establishing new goals and priorities that should have pretty broad and sweeping impacts to the community. And as such, those projects have a really robust engagement program. Lots of open houses, planning commission work sessions, check-ins, things like that. Because the nature of this project is kind of the opposite. We already know and already have kind of gotten, city council or others approval for the goals and policies we're seeking to implement. We are just amending our code to do a better job of reaching those goals. So our outreach for this project is much more confined. As we wrap up summer, start looking closer to fall, we're going to be preparing the staff report, finalizing those code changes into a final version of the draft, prepare our staff report with those legal findings, and then share the proposed changes with Planning Commission prior to the public hearing. And then we'll wrap up the project with public hearings in phase 4, and that will be in fall of 2025, final dates to be determined. But the goal really is to have city council approval and these code amendments in effect by the end of the calendar year. So you'll be hearing more from us probably in the late September, October time for this project to be coming to Planning Commission in a public hearing setting. So let's talk a little bit about what kind of amendments we expect to be bringing forth to Planning Commission down the road. There's kind of 4 major buckets of things we foresee them falling into. The first is implementing changes to state law. The second one is kind of fixing current code so it works better. This year, we elected to have a theme. We focused on transportation-related provisions. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. The third kind of category is doing follow-up to previous projects, doing some follow-up amendments to catch things we missed. And then the final category is just kind of minor miscellaneous changes that really don't fit in one of these bigger categories. So regarding state law, every year, Oregon State Legislature goes through their legislative session And especially over the last few years, they've taken a greater interest in changes to law that affects land use at a local level. And there are some regulations that require that local municipalities update their development code to reflect changes in state law. The current legislative session is just wrapping up, should wrap up end of June, later this week, I believe. And next week, we're going to be sitting down as a planning team with our legal city attorney's office and review all of the bills that have been approved this last legislative session and identify what actions we need to take citywide, but also more specifically from a planning standpoint in the development code, what actions we need to take, which are urgent, which one have a short timeline to get in become effective. And based on that, we'll identify which of these bills could be addressed through the code maintenance project. So it is certainly possible that some of the amendments that you'll see later this year are directly being directed by changes to state law. We don't know what those are yet, but we'll have an idea pretty darn soon once the legislative session wraps up, and we'll work on getting those incorporated into our amendments that you'll see later this year. The second amendment, types of amendments, is just making the code better. As we go through and administer the code, review projects, meet with applicants for pre-application conferences, and just huddle around the virtual code and talk about things. We recognize that there are conflicts in the code or errors or issues that just aren't quite as clear as they could be. And sometimes that results in challenges or in practicalities, or sometimes impossible to actually implement the code as it's written. And that results in delays and additional conversations where if we just clarify to resolve those issues, we could get through the process a lot quicker, approve projects quicker, and get our applicants down the road on the way to construction even quicker. So we anticipate having new language or amended language that clears up these issues, resolves any conflicts. Sometimes we add new definitions where we didn't define terms before to make it more clear that when we say X, this is what it means. So that definition chapter is really, really helpful. And every year it's expected that this is going to cover all kinds of topics in the development code. And the same will be for this year, except this year we decided to also have a more specific focus on transportation related issues. Transportation issues are regulated through several different regulatory books or handbooks or development code. We have the Transportation System Plan, which talks about at a much higher level how our public transportation system should grow and accommodate needs as the city grows. We have the Engineering Design Manual, which is kind of administered by our public works folks. That really gets down into the nitty-gritty about how our public infrastructure should be built and maintained. So we're talking streets and sidewalks and sewer lines and everything. But also we have development code regulations that speak to transportation rules. And that really tends to focus on, pedestrian and vehicle circulation on private property, and then how those private property circulation elements interact with the public right of way. So the goal is to kind of take a look at all the things that have been giving us headaches in that area and bring a suite of changes that are transportation focused to hopefully streamline a lot of those issues. On this slide, I provided two examples of things we are considering here, but there's going to be much more than this we bring forward. The first example is that we're considering doing actually a transfer of authority for who gets to make the decisions for changes to sidewalk designs. As I mentioned, the Engineering Design Manual is one of the regulatory documents the city has, and that document says, based on what functional classification your street is, whether it's arterial or collector or local street, the street should be built in a certain way. You need to have a certain number of lanes, the lane widths, and your sidewalk widths. Your planter strip needs to be 7 feet and your sidewalk 6 feet or what have you. And so all of that is detailed in the Engineering Design Manual. However, if an applicant wants to deviate from that, they have to go through a land use process called a sidewalk design modification. And there have been questions for a while if a land use application is actually the proper process to deviate from what is kind of an engineering question. And the engineering design manual already has a deviation process called a design exception. So we are investigating whether or not it makes sense to transfer authority from the planning division and go into the land use application process to the city engineer and public works to be the decision maker on whether or not or how a change to a sidewalk design could be approved. So potential result is we get rid of the land use application and it goes through a different process instead. Um, Another example is driveway design for single family and middle housing. With the approval of things like House Bill 2001 and City Beaverton's Housing Options Project, those all dealt with middle housing, getting more density in our more traditional single family neighborhoods. We've received a lot of interest in pursuing that from applicants and property owners. And unsurprisingly, probably most of what we see is infill type development, either existing lots that are just only one home and they want to put more development on there, or maybe there's one home they want to scrape that home and build a quadplex or what have you. Um, and a lot of those infill sites are relatively constrained. They have difficult access points. Maybe it's a flag lot with a really narrow flagpole, or it's just the original site wasn't laid out to accommodate additional vehicle circulation to get back to new homes that would want to be built. And we'll give an example here of a flagpole lot here, where we've got a flag here and then actual development here. This is from a pre-app from last year. The development code doesn't actually have much in the way of saying what this driveway design should look like. Prior to the middle housing being implemented, it really wasn't a question we encountered much. You got one house, have your standard, 9-foot driveway to serve the home in the back, and you're good to go. With the interest and the legal ability to do middle housing, like we see here on the screen, we have to we're finding that we need a different tack to take. So right now, our code only says if your driveway is over 150 feet, you have to build a private street the same as a public street, which means 20 plus foot wide, paved width, sidewalk on both sides, a landscape strip on both sides, regardless of how many units that serves. And in a lot of cases, we've got constrained sites where you can't actually fit a full street back there. And if you're only serving 3 homes, it doesn't actually make sense to do a whole street. So what we are doing is looking at eliminating that provision and instead saying, based on the number of units we anticipate this driveway or shared vehicle facility to serve, it should be designed in response to that. So if it's only a small number of units, maybe it's just a 9-foot driveway and it's a shared pedestrian area and everyone can kind of share the space because the chance for vehicle and pedestrian conflicts are going to be really low. But as the unit count goes up, maybe we need a designated pedestrian facility that's grade separated like a more traditional sidewalk. So we are evaluating at what point does it make sense to have higher level of pedestrian facility and really tie it to how many units is it going to be serving. So something that's more context sensitive, more flexible, and really unlocks more development potential, and not letting an overbuilt transportation system get in the way of the city's goals of allowing for more density. So that's an example of a deficiency we've identified in the code that we hit your head against the wall. We're finally able to tackle it and identify there's a better way to do it while still providing the goals of greater density and safe vehicle maneuverability and safe pedestrian circulation as well. So we're definitely excited to bring that one forward, and there'll be a lot more transportation items brought forward in the future. Kind of the third category is a follow-up corrective amendments. City Beaverton does 1 or 2 major text amendments a year. You heard recently about the designing walkable places. Cooper Mountain just got wrapped up. We'll have changes to the TSP, and those are really big changes. There's hundreds and hundreds of pages of changes, and there are just times where you get most of it bang on right, but there are going to be issues that arise that you really hard to identify until you start implementing them. Or maybe there's language that isn't as clear that you didn't catch because you were reading 150 pages of regulations and something didn't quite get the attention it deserved. And you don't really notice that until you go to administer the code and go, oh, that could have been written better. Code maintenance is an opportunity to go back as kind of a make good and clean up some things that maybe we didn't catch the first time around, whether it's an error or a conflict or something that just could have been written a little bit more clear. Having the opportunity to do a follow-up to these is a really great opportunity to kind of test drive some of these big projects and then come through and do some cleanup once we know what things maybe didn't quite hit the mark right away. And then the final kind of bucket is just minor miscellaneous changes, which I guess you could kind of call this entire project. This is removing redundant or obsolete code sections, things that just things we miss, things that don't work, citations that are incorrect, improper word usage. Using last year we had principal versus principal, PLE versus PAL. There are just all these little things that when you do a major project, you overlook and go, now we can fix that. This project is the opportunity to fix those things. And it's also an opportunity to fix any conflicts, as I mentioned, within the development code, but also other regulatory documents. Sometimes other regulatory documents like the Transportation System Plan or the Engineering Design Manual, they do their updates. And while we used to maybe have our regulations in alignment, maybe another document changes, and now we need to update the development code to make sure they're back in alignment. So there really is just a really broad spectrum of items that we are going to be bringing forward to commission later this year. So that is kind of an overview of what code maintenance is, what Planning Commission's role is, when we think the project's going to be moving forward, and what kind of things Planning Commission can expect to see. So now we have a set of questions. And again, these are the questions that were in your memo, but I'll read through all of them and then kind of open it up to Commission for discussion. The first one is, how far in advance of the public hearing would it be helpful to receive the materials? If you've noticed, most of development review that Planning Commission considers, you get it a week in advance. But this is going to be a pretty big package of changes, even though it's a lot of little changes, those start to add up. I don't remember the exact page count of last year's code maintenance, but it was in the hundreds. So it's a lot to digest. So we know a week is not enough, but we'd like to hear from Commission. Is it 2 weeks? Is it 3 weeks? Is it a month? We'd love to get a general idea of what level of additional time Planning Commission would like to have to be able to review these materials so that they can provide engaged feedback at the public hearing. The second question is if there are any requests for organization or explanation of the materials. In the staff memo, I provided an attachment that gave a couple of pages from last year's code maintenance. There were tables that looked something like this. 3 columns that said, this is your code citation on the left, a summary of the changes in the middle, and an explanation of why the change is needed on the right. And then also red line changes with underline and strike through to show exactly what the changes are. In addition to that, there will be a clean copy. So you can read it without all the little having to interpret everything through here. That was the information, or that's how the information was conveyed to Planning Commission last year. But if there is anything else, any other method, any other format that Commission would find valuable, we'd love to hear that. And then finally, if there are any requests for how staff presents this information at the hearing itself. This will be a ton of information. We certainly won't be able to go item through item through item. We would be there all night and then some probably. But is there a preference for how we want to organize the information, how we share it with you? I believe last year, the project manager just kind of went chapter by chapter, did a couple of high points for each one. If that makes sense to the Planning Commission, we can certainly do that. But if there's another approach that the Commission finds would be valuable, an easier way to engage, we're certainly open to sharing that way instead. And then, of course, if Commission has any questions of staff about the process or the focus of the project, we're certainly happy to answer those questions tonight as well. So I would love to turn it over to the Commission for any answers to these questions. I'll start with how far in advance of the public hearing would be helpful. But really, any questions or comments the Commission said, we'd love to hear them.
Steve, this is Chair Adams. I'm wondering, how many materials are we talking about? You said it was-
As in like how many pages?
Yeah, that'd be helpful to
Yeah.
know what we're
Yeah.
reviewing.
So I went back and looked. So last year, the goal was to take care of as much of that 6-year backlog as we could. So there was a lot in there. I don't think we'll have as much this year, but I'll give you an idea of how much was there last year. Um, I went back and counted how many pages of this table. We kind of call them the indices, these reference tables that I'm showing on the screen right now. For all chapters, that was about 50 pages of table. I don't think we'll have that many, but it gives you an idea of how long that information can get. I did not go through and count every page that actually had the track changes on there. I probably would still be doing that right now if I were to do that. But that gives you an idea. So we're talking at least a couple of dozen pages for sure of code citation, code explanation, and or code summary, and then explanation of that. So it's certainly a considerable amount to digest.
That's great. I would like to, personally, I would like to look at like a 2-week lead for that. I'd like to hear what the other commissioners think as far as the time frame.
Yeah, I'm just trying to wrap my head around that. I think 1 week is definitely not going to be enough.
Mhm.
But I don't know if 30 days is too much to ask. Like, I don't know what the process kind of is for that, but sometimes just having a little bit of runway is helpful.
Yeah, that's fair. And Commissioner Holmes, to give you an idea of kind of our internal process, we will be working up until pencils down, and when we share the information for you, that's kind of pencils down for us. So we can schedule it and then kind of work backwards, and kind of one of the great things about this about code maintenance and the way we've set it up is we are just kind of working and getting as much stuff in here as we can. We've got that running list. And when it's pencils down for us, that's okay because we know next year we're going to pick it up again and keep going. So whatever the commission needs, we can kind of work backwards from that. 3 weeks, 4 weeks, probably not the most unreasonable request, I'd say. 2 weeks at minimum, I think is completely fair, but maybe even a little bit more wiggle room, I don't think is unreasonable.
I have a follow-up on that, but I just also want to notice that Commissioner McCann has had her hand raised.
I was trying not to just butt in. But Anna, why don't you go ahead and go? I will go after you. Maybe you'll
Sure.
resolve
So-
my question.
I do want to distinguish between the legal requirement to publish the full proposal and staff report in advance of the hearing. That needs to be published 7 days in advance. Um, if I recall correctly, last year we actually provided some opportunities to review sections of the code as they were completed in advance. And that's something that we could do here so that we may have a little more flexibility to give you all an opportunity to have more time for review if we kind of stagger it. So rather than try to give you the full report significantly in advance, we might be able to give you part of it, the first few chapters, for example, 4 weeks in advance, a few more 3 weeks in advance, and so on. And again, that full complete staff report with everything must be provided 7 days in advance. But we could plan to do that 2 weeks in advance. So we do have some flexibility in terms of how it's provided to you. I think the other thing I would note is that, and Steve did mention this, but I want to emphasize it, that staff can also flag the proposed amendments for Planning Commission that we believe to be kind of more important to review, more prominent, of greater interest versus things like, oh, there's a grammatical error here. And that's one way that we can kind of help you kind of prioritize the time that you spend reviewing this proposal by helping you kind of sort through the things that are more complex and kind of rise closer to the kind of policy decision threshold versus being more on the mundane fix-it side.
So, I was gonna weigh in and say, I think we need at least 3 weeks. Because while I appreciate and support the idea of kind of sort of noting which are the not grammatical errors. So you can kind of skip ahead, but it does, while it sounds like 50 pages of, we receive 50 pages of the chart, that equates to hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pages of code that you have to reference back to see the context in which these things were changed. So it is a lot. So I'd say at least 3 weeks. And then I'm going to float an idea that might be too much. So if we're going to bite this into chunks like we did last time, it might be really nice if we do one meeting and we go through a piece. If then once we do our discussion, maybe there can be a little mini presentation of what's coming. So that everyone can kind of get their heads into what's going to be the next chunk. Because I think one of the things that is sometimes hard is there's so much and we're trying to digest it, then we get a very, we can only spend so much time presenting the material because we don't want to be here all night. And then everyone just has to kind of rapid fire whatever questions they have and then make a recommendation. And sometimes it feels like a little bit like rushed, and maybe there's a way to kind of prep the group for kind of the next piece, or I don't know, without creating extra meetings or anything like that.
Yeah, we can plan for there to be we can plan for the hearing to be continued over 2 meetings rather
That would be
than
great
have it
too.
all happen in the same meeting.
Mhm.
There is a little bit of it's better for us to plan ahead for that than to do
Mhm.
it just kind of if the commission happens to want more time, just because we are working towards the council hearing and that needs to be scheduled in advance.
Mhm.
But if we plan for that, that's something that we could accommodate. I also want to let you know that the Designing Walkable Places text amendment will be coming to Planning Commission in the same time frame. We had wanted to avoid it happening all in the same meeting, but we can try to be strategic about how those two things kind of land on the commission calendar, and if they overlap, to minimize how much they overlap.
Okay. Yeah.
Thanks,
Like,
Commissioner McKenna.
yeah, thank you.
Commissioner McAvoy, you have a question?
Yeah, sure. It's mostly comments, I think. I was thinking about that designing walkable spaces scheduled meeting in September as well. And with that in mind, I would say 3 weeks at a minimum, maybe four, or I kind of like the idea that Commissioner McCann had of maybe stretching this intentionally over 2 meetings, just so that we're not overloaded with both, the sheer volume, but also the, really important decisions that need to be made all in 2 meetings worth of time. That seems like a lot. So spacing them out, or just giving us plenty of lead time on the 3 or 4 weeks lead time on the code amendments here that we're talking about today, so we can chip away at those.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Commissioner McKenna. Or McAvoy. Any other commissioners have any questions?
I have additional questions, not about the timing, or is
Okay.
that? I was just wondering
Please.
if anyone from staff could just sort of say a little bit about it, because there's in the memo it references approval criteria for the commission to consider, and I'm sort of wrapping my head around sort of with the traditional application what those criteria look like and how we determine what those are. But for something like this, legislative, they're passing on to council. Do you have any guidance for us as to what those criteria are or how to think about our decision making?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the staff report will outline and detail, just like a traditional development reapplication, what those approval criteria are. They're a little bit more petty, for lack of a better term. It's less about is it complying with certain design review requirements, and more about what other regulatory documents is it complying with. So is it complying with the elements of the comprehensive plan and other regulations? And staff's findings will kind of outline in detail that chapter 1 of the comprehensive plan is applicable because of these reasons, and here's why. it is complying with that, and so on and so forth. So staff's findings will kind of walk through what those are. If any commissioners are interested, they can certainly check out the development code. And the approval criteria for the text amendment are laid out right there. And we could even, if commissioners are interested, we could provide maybe last year's staff report to give you an idea of how that's formatted, what that looks like, and what kind of findings were provided last year. So you can get a kind of idea of how a legislative amendment differs from a development review amendment.
For a text amendment like this one, because it's not intended to implement any significant policy changes, those findings to the approval criteria are not going to be as detailed and lengthy as when a project is making major policy changes. So for example, the staff report and findings for the Cooper Mountain Community Plan were extremely detailed, technical, and lengthy because it included essentially the planning for infrastructure and development for that entire new 1,200 acre area. So there was actually a tremendous amount of very specific technical work that had to be done because it was a completely newly planned area. In this case, because we're working within the framework of adopted policy, it's less detailed. So Steve, I do like your idea of sharing last year's staff report with the commission to kind of get a sense of what they'll be seeing. And I think that for the commissioners that are new, which is the majority of the commission, this is actually going to be a bit of a wonderful crash course in the development code itself, right? At the time that you review this, you'll still be new to the commission and you won't have had a lot of experience yet applying the development code. So, so it is a chance to become more familiar with the structure of the code, the way the different chapters are laid out, et cetera. Just know that we don't expect the commission to be doing copy editing of this amendment, although if you find errors, by all means, we will not have hurt feelings if you point them out. But really, it again, I think the great opportunity here is for this to be kind of a way for the commission to become more familiar with the code.
Perfect. Thanks, Anna. I agree with you, Anna. If Steve could share that information ahead of time, that'd be fantastic. So unless there's any additional questions by the commissioners, I think we can move on to public testimony. Now is the time for public comments on the code maintenance project. For those viewing via Zoom webinar, please communicate by using the raise hand feature in your Zoom menu bar. If calling in, press *9 to alert the chair that you would like to speak. It looks like we have no public comment at this time. So the final item on the agenda is to approve the meeting minutes for February 5th, 2025. Is there a motion?
Chair Adams, I move to approve as submitted.
Great. Thanks, Commissioner Winter. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Commissioner McCann, thank you for the second. And I will do a roll call vote. Commissioner Holmes.
Approved.
Thank you. Commissioner McCann.
Approve.
Commissioner McAvoy.
Approve.
And Commissioner Mettler.
Approve.
Great. And Commissioner Winter.
Aye.
I approve as well. With that, It passes. And we move on to adjourning this meeting. We are now adjourned at 7:19 p.m. on Wednesday evening.
Right. Thank you, everyone.
Thank everyone.
Thank
Thank you all very much.
Yeah,
Thanks,
thanks for your
everyone.
presentation, Steve.